Hey, this is Kalen, and welcome to The Drop. Today, we're breaking down the latest in the Colorado River negotiations, what's changing, what's at stake, and what it means for the states depending on this critical water source. Let's dive in. Today I'm joined by Bill Hasencamp, the manager of Colorado River Resources for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. We're going to be talking about everything Colorado River and water sourcing in California. And thank you so much for joining us today, Bill.
It's great to be here.
So let's start easy and basic and tell us just kind of about yourself, your background, and your role at Metropolitan.
Yeah, so I joined Metropolitan in 2001 as the manager of Colorado River Resources. And my role here is to manage our Colorado River supplies. And I think it's been said that Metropolitan's most valuable asset is our water right on the Colorado River. It is priceless. You couldn't buy it with all the money in the world. And it's a privilege to be able to manage that key resource for our district and all of Southern California.
And I mean, Colorado River Aqueduct, it's been in the news a lot lately. And I know there's been a lot of discussions on this and a lot of negotiations between, it's not just California that takes part in the usage of this. There's many, many states that utilize the Colorado River, correct?
Colorado flows through 7 states in the United States, plus 2 states in the country of Mexico. Provides water to over a dozen tribes, 40 million people, millions of acres of productive agricultural land all rely on this resource in the hottest and driest part of the United States.
So just kind of speaking from our personal perspective, EMWD, we rely on imported water. And although we've got a pretty solid local water, or we have a lot of local water as well, but we do rely a lot on imported water, both from State Water Project as well as Colorado. And so to say that it's important to us is an understatement, because it's extremely important. And we are still very reliant on imported water. And so these negotiations definitely have a direct impact just on each of us, each of these local water districts, as well as the state. It really does boil down to not just the state level, but all these local areas are heavily impacted by this.
Yeah, absolutely. Metropolitan Water District was formed for one purpose, to bring water in from the Colorado River. Mm-hmm. And for 85 years, the Colorado River has been the backbone supply for 19 million people here in Southern California, from Riverside County out to Ventura County down to San Diego County. And although there are other sources of supply that our region, that's important to our region, State Water Project and all of our local projects, the Colorado River has been the most reliable supply for 85 years. Mm-hmm. It's been the supply that we've turned to over and over again when our other supplies were short. And it's been the supply that allowed our region to grow from a relatively small area in the 1940s to the megalopolis, 5th largest economic region in the country, in the world.
You say it runs through 7 states, and not to mention tribal areas that it hits and that are reliant upon it. Is Mexico also part of that group? Do they also utilize Colorado River resources?
Yeah, Mexico gets water, including the productive ag lands of Mexicali Valley and the cities of Tijuana, Ensenada, Mexicali all get water from the Colorado River. So everyone has a stake in what happens to this vital waterway.
Sure. Not just states, but countries, plural on this now, that are also reliant on it. It's, 7 states that it runs across. Talk to me a bit about sort of the scale and reach of this system. You talked about who it serves, but as far as just, there's got to be a ton of infrastructure involved in this.
Yeah, Metropolitan alone, building the aqueduct during the height of the Depression was quite a feat. Mm-hmm. William Mulholland had built the Los Angeles Aqueduct, And after that, when the region needed our own supply more than the city of LA, he went and looked at the Colorado River to find a spot to bring in water. But unlike the LA Aqueduct, which is gravity all the way to the city of Los Angeles, the
Hmm.
Colorado goes over some mountains in the desert. So he had to figure out a way to use the same um, concepts of as much gravity as possible while pumping water up. So he chose a location that enabled um, pumping plants to be used, but also long stretches of gravity to flow to our region.
Hmm.
Ultimately, he wasn't around to build the aqueduct, but to get it done, we also had to build a forebay on the Colorado River, which is Lake Havasu, so we could pump from a reservoir instead of the lake itself or the
Hmm.
river itself, so it's cleaner. And then once the water gets to its high point, which is near Shirako Summit, off of the 10 freeway, it's gravity all the way from there to Riverside, even to Santa Monica and San Diego,
Oh,
about
wow.
200 miles of gravity. So it's quite an engineered system, and that's just to get water here.
Right.
For the rest of the states, we've got Colorado is one of the most dammed rivers in the United States. It's got the largest reservoir in the country with Lake Mead, followed by the second largest Lake Powell. And if when all the reservoirs were full about 25 years ago, it stored about 4 times the flow of the entire Colorado River in storage. So there's no other river in the United States that's anything like that.
Now you said when the reservoirs were full, so that's going to transition kind of to our next part of long-term drought, declining flows. There's less water coming through the Colorado River than was when they originally kind of started making these multi-state agreements. Is that correct?
Yeah, in 1922, they made the 7 states negotiated a split for the river, which was to have half the upper basin states of Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming have access to half of what they thought the flow was, and the lower basin states of Arizona, Nevada, California half, plus set aside a little bit more for Mexico through a treaty that was in 1944.
Mm-hmm.
When they divided up the water, they thought it was a relatively wet period. They thought there was about 18 million acre feet of flow. It turns out that the flow over the last century was closer to 15 million. So right off the bat, the Colorado was already over allocated.
Mm-hmm.
And now this century, because of a drying climate and drought, we're about 12, a little over 12.5 million acre feet. So we're dropped even farther again.
Mm-hmm.
And the projections are the flows might continue to drop. So we've seen um, changes in the river, what we thought it could provide when we first made the agreements, to now realizing the river's a lot less um, productive than it was 100 years ago.
Was it just, I mean, 100 years ago, was it just a really rainy or really, I guess, abundant time for water? Or has it just been long-term drought that we're talking about ever since then? What's kind of, this is the norm, I guess, now in comparison?
Well, they didn't have a long period of record when they negotiated the agreements in 1922. They only
Mm-hmm.
had about 20 years of data, and so that data turned out to be during a wet 20-year period, and so but that's all they had to go on.
Right.
But they quickly realized that that number was too high.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now we're realizing not only was that number too high, but it's also shrinking over time because of a warming climate. And this year we've seen the lowest snowpack on record in the Colorado Basin, the second lowest runoff, and the warmest temperatures we've ever seen. We're having a record hot summer across the Colorado Basin states
Mm-hmm.
with very little snow last year. Um, so there's definitely concerns about where the trend is heading.
It's kind of a perfect storm of everything sort of going against what we need, or well, I guess a lack thereof as far as storms go, but kind of everything hitting all at once. And so Now, the agreement on that has been under discussion for quite some time to sort of figure out what the new allocations should look like. And that negotiation had been going on for a couple years. Is that about right?
So the Colorado Basin has a history of working cooperatively together and having the states decide the outcome of the water supplies and not the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
That started in 1922 when the 7 states decided how to share the river. Then in 2007, when we started to see the reservoirs decline, the states got together to come up with a 20-year plan about how to manage the rivers, including who takes what level of cuts under what conditions and how the reservoirs should be operated. That agreement expires in about 6 weeks. On October 1, we start the new rules.
Yeah.
So the states have been negotiating for the last 2 to 3 years to try to come up with, the hope was a new agreement that would be 20 years, that would go through the mid 2040s, and that we could have some kind of certainty on how much water we could get from the river.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, the states, as much as they tried, have not reached agreement. And now we find ourselves on the cusp of a lot of uncertainty going forward, the type of uncertainty that we haven't ever seen on the Colorado River.
And at the time of this recording, we're in early mid-August. This will be published at the end of August. So that by the time this is published, that timeline will be even closer.
Yeah, it will be, yes.
Even more dire. So, so you talked about the basin. There's a lower and there's an upper basin. What covers what?
Yeah, so when they divided up the river in 1922, the dividing point was chosen to be Lee Ferry, which is in just upstream of the Grand Canyon. And that's generally the point where the Colorado River goes from a gaining river to a losing river.
Mm-hmm.
And the upstream states were allowed to use 7.5 million acre feet of water. They're currently using about 4.5. They've never fully developed. And that's been a point that they make, that the lower basin has benefited because the upper basin never fully developed.
Mm-hmm.
The lower basin states, Arizona, Nevada, California, did fully develop, and by the year 2000 started using all 7.5 million acre feet, and we've been using that ever since. Although we have implemented conservation measures at times to reduce our demands, but nonetheless, the lower basin has been using a lot more water than the upper basin. One of the disputes is the compact has a requirement for the upper basin to release some water to the lower basin. But the two basins don't agree on what that number is.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the sticking points in the negotiations. The lower basin says, upper basin, even though you're using less than your compact amount, you still have a requirement to deliver water to the lower basin, and you're not delivering enough. So you need to implement conservation, not to save water in your state, but to send downstream to the lower basin states.
Mm-hmm.
And the upper basin states haven't agreed to do that yet. And ultimately, for a sustainable Colorado, we do need all 7 states to contribute towards a conservation plan, not just right now a situation where the 3 lower basin states are conserving.
You mentioned conservation efforts, and Southern California is no stranger to conservation efforts. We talk about it and implement it and try and promote it so much. At EMWD, we have literally had to change the word because people have just completely gone deaf to the word conservation here. And so now everything is now water use efficiency. And we try to stay as far away from the word conservation anymore because it immediately triggers everybody's eye rolls. Conservation was literally something that they would come to my elementary school and talk about. The Water District, and even Metropolitan, I think, used to do a lot of outreach on it too. And so it's really something, the concept of conservation of water is really, really brought in at an early age. especially in this region where it's so dry and water is such a precious resource.
Yeah, I think the message has gotten out. People are getting it. They recognize that there are sustainable lawns and landscaping that people can choose that have a much lower footprint, but are just as nice as turf
Mm-hmm.
and changes to plumbing codes and things like that that have made a big difference. We've Our region has been a leader in the Western United States in reducing our demands for imported water.
Mm-hmm.
25 years ago, so we get about half of our water from the Colorado River and half from the Northern California Sacramento River of our
Right.
imported water, and Metropolitan is the delivers imported water in addition to the local water that our member agencies provide. We were bringing in about 2.5 million acre feet of water from those two rivers 25 years ago. Today, it's down to about 1.3 million acre feet, so
Wow.
almost cut in half because of increased not just conservation, but also local resource projects that we provide incentives to. Water recycling, groundwater desalting, groundwater cleanup of contaminated groundwater, other projects like that that can increase our stormwater capture, increase our local supplies so we don't have to bring in water from these other supplies that are being impacted by climate change and regulation.
Well, what's more important or what's more impressive about that is that that's a major cut, and population growth has not been stagnant. We have grown exponentially, and especially this region has grown exponentially, and yet we've still made that cuts such a major cut. And I think that really does speak to the conservation efforts and just trying to be more responsible, trying to be smarter about it, and really using technology and just alternative habits.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's one of the myths on the Colorado River. If you
Mm-hmm.
read a lot of Colorado River stories, and there's a lot of them in the news, it says a drying climate and population growth and increasing demand is dropping the reservoirs. That's absolutely not true.
Mm-hmm.
Population has been growing, but the cities across the basin, our region, but Las Vegas, Denver, others are taking less water. So there's not this population surge that is draining the reservoirs at all. It's the opposite. The human elephant is taking less. The problem is Mother Nature's drying it faster than we're implementing our conservation measures. So we have to now come up with new ways, and it's not just the cities. The farmers have to be a part of the solution, and we do have agreements with farming communities throughout the Colorado Basin or throughout the California that get Colorado River water. With Imperial Irrigation District, we fund water efficiency so they can grow the same crops using less water. With Palo Verde Irrigation District, we have a rotational fallowing program where we pay farmers to not grow crops for a period of time. And in Bard Water District, we pay farmers not to grow their summer crop, focus on their winter vegetables that don't take much water, and in the summer don't grow that higher water use, lower value crop.
Mm-hmm.
And so those pieces together have really helped California reduce its use from the Colorado. So it's got to be not just the cities, but working with farmers and the agriculture community to collectively reduce our draw on the river. And we've done a good job, but we have to double down and do more than we've been doing.
Yeah. Here's a question we've already really answered, but I mean, these discussions have to be difficult to be in. And I mean, like all these different states, all with kind of a different interpretation, different needs, are all kind of trying to make their point and come and realize what the situation is and are trying to make the point to get as much as they can, I'm sure. But I mean, what makes these really difficult negotiations, difficult conversations?
Yeah, I've personally been very disappointed that we're at a place where we are today, and I know my organization feels people here feel the same way. We we were hoping for a 7-state agreement where, as difficult as it is, that we all collectively agree to use less water. But what happened in this process is the federal government decided to negotiate only with one person per state, a gubernatorial appointee by each state. And last time around, water districts and water agencies were involved. And water agencies tend to be more conservative because our job is to make sure we have a reliable water supply. So we're much more willing to make smaller cuts and not stand on our hardline position of what our rights say. We're much more willing to compromise so that we have more certainty. And this negotiation, it's been more politics and not the water district saying, I mean, if you ask water users across the basin, I think they all say, yeah, let's step up and be part of the solution. But once it got into the politics, it became finger pointing and progress wasn't being made. And now we're in a place where 7 states haven't reached agreement, and we're going to have rules that apply to the lower basin states only, which might lead to litigation. And if a lower basin state ends up suing the upper basin state because they're not conserving, then the whole history of the Colorado changes course. Instead of this reputation of collaboration and working together, hand it over the courts to let someone else decide our future. It's not a future that I like to see.
So let's talk about that federal framework a bit. It's about a 10-year drought management structure with like 2-year reviews, or every 2 years they kind of review it. Is that sort of how it's structured?
Yeah, since they didn't have a 7-state agreement, and people did try hard. I don't want to dismiss that there wasn't a lot of effort involved. The feds did make this a priority, and people spent a lot of time in, but couldn't overcome the politics. And so we're at a place now without a 7-state agreement. So what the federal government, the Bureau of Reclamation, Department of Interior did is in a couple weeks ago, in July of 2026, came out with a final EIS and a preferred alternative, which doesn't have specific actions, but provides a framework for how the river could be managed for the next 10 years. The framework is pretty large. It could be, the framework says the lower basin states could have cuts from 0 to 3 million acre feet in any 1 year. And that releases from Lake Powell could be anywhere from 5 to 12 million acre feet in any 1 year. So broad parameters in this framework that will then be, the actual rules will be developed 2 years at a time. And we anticipate that in the next couple of weeks, in mid-August of 2026, we'll get the first 2 rules, that first 2 years of that operating plan coming out. And we have an idea of what it's going to be. It's going to be cuts to the lower basin only. And the country of Mexico is a separate process. We understand that they're going to also participate. But it's only 2 years, and then we'll be back at the table in the next year or two to figure out what to do in 2029. And that's assuming that we're not in court, and but we're still collaborating. So the door is still open for a 7-state agreement, even though it's not there today. This framework agreement does say if the 7 states can come to an agreement that's more than 2 years, well, we can substitute that in.
That was my next question: is
at
any
there time,
a way to
the door is open.
that? Okay.
But in the absence of that happening, then we'll do this every 2 years, get back on the horse and figure out a short-term plan.
Wow. I guess we talked about conservation a bit, but are there, I mean, I guess what's on the table now, what's being discussed to sort of respond to what we anticipate is coming as far as conservation and efficiency investments?
Well, the federal government has been paying for a lot of conservation
Hmm.
through the Inflation Reduction Act, and Lower Basin conserved a record amount from 2022 to 2026, and that funding is ending this year. Even with that, we're still at a record low level in Lake Mead. In fact, we hit two records this year. Um, in early August, Lake Mead hit its record low level since it was initially filled in the 1930s. And that record will be broken every single day for the next 3 or 4 months as it continues to fall.
Hmm.
The other record that we broke is the lowest release from Lake Powell, which is the lowest flow through the Grand Canyon since Lake Powell was built in the 1960s. So if this was your year that you've been waiting to raft the Grand Canyon, you're highly disappointed. It's going to be a much longer trip than it could be or should be. So even with all the conservation that has been happening, we're still in this dire situation that we do have to figure out new ways, and we don't have that figured out yet. But we are exploring in new tools in this agreement. And one of the new things that is being explored is interstate programs that can provide water to multiple states. Right now, up until this point, it's each state's on its own to figure out how to reduce use. But there are some projects that are bigger than one state can implement, or even one country. And
Sure.
so Southern Nevada and Arizona have already invested in Pure Water Southern California, which would be, if approved and built, would be the largest water recycling project in the nation, providing 160 or so thousand acre feet,
Hmm.
which is about more than a 10% further reduction for Met to reduce its demand on imported water. But some of that could also provide water to Arizona and Nevada through their funding by leaving some of our Colorado River water and Lake Mead that they could access. And that could just be the start of projects. We're looking at, could we fund projects in Mexico that could provide benefit to multiple parties? Are there other types of actions where let's just not have one state, but let's have multiple states fund some maybe big projects that could provide relief across a broad region?
Do you think that kind of helps too with these future negotiations of now we're starting to talk kind of joint projects? Does that, I mean, does that help at all when you come back to the table for the Colorado River itself?
It absolutely does help. I mean, we have been partnering with Southern Nevada Water Authority and the Central Arizona Project to fund some projects in the Yuma desalting plant, and we funded a reservoir. It's called Brock Reservoir that captured excess flow that saved water. And so because we have that partnership, it's much easier to collaborate, and it's harder to sue someone that you're in a partnership with.
Sure.
And it makes sense that we're all relying on the river, so let's try to have everyone that relies on the river have a certain level of reliability from it, and not say, well, we're a higher priority than you are, therefore you suffer and we don't, right? That's not a responsible public position to take.
Hmm.
We're better off saying, how can all of us make sure that we have enough water to meet our future needs?
So as I start to wrap up, what do you see as, I guess, Colorado River Aqueduct's continued relevance? What's this going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years from now? Are we less reliant, or do we have less of a need for it?
It's hard to predict where the river's going to be in 20, 30 years. But history shows us two key things here in our region. One is we can reduce our reliance on the river. and we've done that significantly, and we will continue to do that. But we also need flexibility when there's not much water here in California from the State Water Project, or it doesn't rain here in our region. We do need to rely on the Colorado in those years. Mm-hmm. So while on average, if you look at the last 20 years, on average, we've taken about 400,000 acre feet a year less from the Colorado River. But in those times when the state project underperformed, we took as much from the river as we could in those years. And I don't see that changing. And mm-hmm. and we have Lake Mead that provides flexibility, even as low as it is. Even though it's at a record low level, it still has over 7 million acre feet of water. So it still can give you that flexibility that as long as you cut when the pain is the least, because we have adequate supplies in our region in wetter years, that you can fall back on it in dry times when you really need it. And I don't see that changing. I still think 30 years from now, when the chips are down here in Southern California, we will again turn to the river and say, hey, help us out. We need you.
Okay, so take us home here with this last question. But in your mind, what's the path towards durable basin governance? I mean, what is it going to look like in your mind?
Well, the model of each state working together or working collectively, all 7 states, with minimal federal oversight, basin-wide oversight is, I think, a model that we're going to try to keep in place. The federal government is the water master of the lower basin, and that was one of the outcomes. The Colorado has a history of working together, with the exception of Arizona suing California when they wanted to build the Central Arizona project, and it was a dispute over how to account for tributary uses in the state of Arizona. Mm-hmm. And in the 1960s, it went to the Supreme Court that ruled in favor of Arizona. California lost. And one of the consequences was the federal government became the water master of the lower basin. And that's why they can cut the lower basin, but not the upper basin, because the upper basin remained autonomous because they weren't involved in litigation. I do think that, but when the states get together, it really is the states working out. And despite this short-term setback this year, I do think it's a model of success. We just need to figure out ways to get the right people in the room and the table and the voices heard. The river has been on a path of being more inclusive and transparent in my career until the last couple of years. It seems to have switched and it's become more opaque, and exclusive. A smaller group deciding how the river should be managed. That's not a recipe for success, and this shows it. If we can get back to more broader participation, better ideas, bigger ideas, more people in the room, the right people in the room, I think we can get back on a track that is needed for a more sustainable river.
Bill, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been really interesting and fun to talk about, as I've been able to educate myself a lot more on the Colorado River as well. So thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely.